Talk Show.
Recorded live.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Virtualization Security Roundtable podcast, episode number 73. We've been doing this for quite a while now, over a year, actually almost 2 years, which is good. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And I'd like to introduce our panelists today. Our first one is Eben Rodriguez, who consults with enterprises, systems secure and operate their virtual environments. And Eben, you need to give me a new bio.
Okay, I'll send it over.
Because now Eben does the same thing, but he does it for eBay, which is great.
Yeah. I'm a cloud security infrastructure architect. Try to say that in one breath.
I'd rather not. Also joining us a little bit later will be Michael Berman, who's the CTO of Catbird and pioneer and industry leader in security and compliance for the virtual environment. Usually joining us also is someone from High Trust who won't be here today. Well, hopefully they will. My name is Edward Halecki. I'm a.k.a. TechSciWill on the VMware Communities Forum and just about everywhere else. You can find me on Twitter under that handle. An author of the book, VMware vSphere and Virtual Infrastructure Security, Securing the Virtual Environment, as well as VMware ESX and ESXi and the Enterprise Planning Deployments of Your Virtualization Servers, which is my latest book. It came out recently. And they're all both available on Amazon. Hopefully joining us a little bit later will also be Tim Pearson, who is a contributing author for my security book and owner of Data Center Inc. and also equalizes our podcast. So enough of the normal ones. Our current guest is Tal Klein, who's the Director of Technical Marketing at Citrix. And joining us also is Andrew Wood, who is an application virtualization analyst for the virtualization practice, a place where I also do some analyst work. And I'd like to thank them for joining us.
Yeah, no worries.
So this conversation actually stems from two things that I did recently. One was a Bright Talk on virtual desktop security, actually asking the question, are they really secure? And a follow-on write-up I did that kind of was an introductory write-up to that Bright Talk in presentation. Now, I went off on Twitter, and hopefully we'll have other people joining us later. Simon Crosby basically on Twitter said, no, they're not secure. And Tal took the opposite end of that, and a lot of people from VMware took the opposite end of that, and I'm kind of somewhere in the middle.
I'm actually somewhere in the middle as well. You know, I wasn't. I didn't take the opposite end of that. I just said that it's Simon's stance, I believe, was that VDI is just as insecure as legacy PCs, and I added there was my perspective on it is yes, you still need to take security considerations when deploying VDI, but inherently VDI is more secure than legacy PCs, and that's the stand I'll be taking today.
And that's where you and I will differ always. I do not think that VDI is anywhere near as inherently secure as anything else.
Okay.
Because I'm looking at it from the perspective, and this is what my whole talk was about, was the fact that people are looking at it from the perspective of the VDI sales pitch, which is you have centralized management, you have centralized patching, you move all your data into the data center, which is usually behind your toughest bastion firewalls ever, and you gain all that economies of scale that you're going to be doing that for. And my approach is, you probably were doing centralized management anyways, you were probably doing centralized patching, and you just moved your most hostile environment known to man into your data center. So, and if you just moved it like normal, like everybody does, flat networks to works, you just moved a hostile environment directly into your data center, where it never was before. So how could that be more secure?
Well, I mean, that makes the assumption that security was not a consideration when transforming, from legacy desktops to VDI.
I'm sorry, Tal. You're going to have to speak up just a little.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll switch over. Is this better? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. What you're talking about makes the assumption that security was not a consideration when making the transition from legacy to VDI. I think that we have to look at a couple of things first.
Let me start. Before I get to the data center. Let me start with what I believe is the most compelling security argument for VDI, which is zero data at the endpoint.
Oh, but that's not true. You and I think the big disagreement there is that if it don't work, data will always end up on the endpoint because I'm in East Podunk, North Dakota,
right,
where there is no network connection, and I'm an insurance agent, and I need those forms filled in properly. I'll guarantee you, before I left, I downloaded them onto my laptop or my iPad. So that data with all the and all those tables I need and everything like that are considered private, confidential data is now sitting out on a public device.
Ed, this takes me back to the days when people said there are all these problems with virtualization or cloud. You have to define what you're talking about first. So I don't know that we have an agreement on what quote-unquote VDI is yet.
Well, VDI for me is an end-user experience issue, always has been. And end users are going to be using virtual desktops no matter where they live.
You're saying, let me make sure I understand correctly. So VDI for you is kind of like what we hear VMware talk about, where you can check a desktop out or take your data with you, right? So it's kind of like secure VDI with some holes in it.
Well, VDI to me is my desktop. This is where Andrew and I get into interesting conversations. And
I'm going to interrupt you just there before you start. If you're going to say VDI is inherently insecure and could tell off in a way, and could tell off because the data has to follow you, and then you say, what would happen in a normal desktop environment? You'd have exactly the same issue, would you not?
Absolutely.
If you took a laptop away. So all we've done here is say, as long as the data has to follow you, that's going to be insecure. But Tal's point was potentially you could have a situation where that user who has that data doesn't need to keep that data local to them because they do have a good network connection. Granted, that's not always possible, but you've now opened up an option that you didn't have before.
Let me ask a question from a feature perspective to the people on the phone. I hear there's some new features. First of all, that ability to check out a desktop, take you with you, was sort of experimental. I guess now it's sort of mainstream. But are there any, if we could just spend 2 minutes or less, are there some security controls that could protect that desktop, like, encryption or expiration, or protect it from loss or theft?
Well, let's consider what it is when you're doing a checkout there. And I think there's only really one company that's doing a proper checkout of a VDI environment, and that would be the Leaf product. I haven't even looked at that. But typically what they're doing when any of the solutions, the client hypervisor type solutions are working, is that they're relying on an encrypted disk at the endpoint. But then you've got to consider what's your authentication to that device. Because all right, your data at rest is encrypted, say someone wanders off with it, but how do you access that device? Is it easy to connect to it and then connect on to your back-end infrastructure? Is it easy to access the data? Is it easy to, it's all very well it being on an encrypted drive, but if the password is etched onto the laptop itself in order to log on, it's not secure at all, is it?
So let me interrupt you a bit, just one there, Andrew, and that is that we now have Simon Crosby on with us. Welcome to the party, Simon.
Hey, Simon.
Hey, thank you very much. Sorry, I'm struggling to get in.
No problem. We're having a rabid discussion. A good discussion.
Hey, guys.
So we actually thought Tal mentioned what we think your thought on virtual desktop security is, and then we started talking about how to define the virtual desktop. So I have one definition for the virtual desktop, and that is basically wherever my data is, whether it's an endpoint device, a VM sitting inside of a server somewhere, inside of my laptop, or something being presented back to me via, ICA or something like that. So I look at it as wherever my data is, desktop.
I don't think that's a rich enough description, because implicit in the whole notion of desktop is also the application, and with application comes user identity and also access to an application, that is rights management. and data does not define rights.
Well, the data for the rights management needs to go with that data.
It can do, but I mean, the fact that an app is on your desktop means that you have access to it. Or maybe the fact that you are logged in using a single sign-on or whatever it happens to be. It's fine to define is identity is an ID, and it's not on the desktop.
So we're talking we have some identity issues here.
Look, a desktop is a context, right? In the context of an identity and an application and its data, you can start to reason about what a desktop is. And indeed, a desktop is about multiple applications, because otherwise you would just use an application abstraction like PS.
Yep.
Yeah. There's no point in having a virtual desktop unless you need what a desktop provides you in addition to a single application running and its data and your identity. And that has to be...
Okay, so Tal, you were trying to say something?
No, I mean, Simon and I are pretty much, completely in agreement about this. I think I'll get to the point where I think, Simon and I maybe may not see eye to eye, but I think that, again, your scenario, the one, and I don't know if you heard the scenario, Simon. He was talking about an offline use case, like somebody who's using VDI then needs to go offline to a customer site or something like that to print out some documentation. So if he doesn't have network connectivity, that means that prior to going to that customer site, he's going to download those documents local, whether he's using VDI or not. And that's my response to that is, again, our philosophy is that and we do not believe that VDI or desktop virtualization today covers 100% of all workloads. And I think that's really important. Citrix's philosophy is a hybrid approach. We're not going around telling people that the only way you should deliver a desktop is through a virtual desktop.
I think Citrix is in the fortunate position of not having to claim that. That is, let's be very clear. VDI addresses at best a few single-digit percentage of use case. Terminal services is a vast percentage of a hosted variety use case, and then everything else is running on a real desktop device.
So let's bring this home. This is a security discussion. I agree 100% with what you guys are saying. I'd like to suggest that we focus the security discussion to the topic of VDI, where you are connected to the network and you have not checked out a desktop. So
I'm not talking about checking out desktops even and you can't remove network from this conversation in any way, shape, or form, because it is all about that.
Well,
it's all about the virtual desktops are all about the users. If the users have a bad experience, they're going to go and do something to give them a good experience.
Okay, so we can talk about that. So there's all these. I always get a kick out of the guy at VMware who said VMware is secure. The only security problems we have are configuration issues, right?
I don't know who said that, but I've never heard it.
Yeah, he got killed at one of the RSA shows. They annihilated him because he said that. It's kind of like Unbreakable Oracle, right?
So the point of focus there is, if the user gets a poor experience from their VDI environment because they haven't listened to Tal and they haven't listened to Simon, and what the organization has done is only deployed VDI, they've got a bit too focused on the marketing and thought that this will be their solution. And so what the organization has done is implemented an entire VDI environment, replaced all the desktops, thrown them out in the skip, and put in a VDI environment. And what Ed's issue is there is, if that experience for those users is very poor, what you'll end up with is actual data leakage, in that they'll email it to themselves, they'll save it to locally, they'll try somehow to get it on a USB drive so that they can work offline.
So let's say we drink the Kool-Aid.
Let Andrew finish here for a second even.
So by putting VDI in, if you don't consider, as Tal rightly says, that there are different use cases, if you just concentrate on VDI and you deliver a poor experience, you can open up your environment to data leakage. Like, for instance, if you have remote access, so you have a traditional desktop environment, and you don't allow users to say have flexible working, to work from home. So what you end up doing is having users emailing spreadsheets to themselves, emailing Word documents to themselves so that they can work at home. But it's exactly the same situation. Yes, they're taking data out by whatever means they can so that they can crack on with their job. And that's Ed's driving concern here. That's
right. But that's a perfect example. But there's another simple one.
Simon, I can't. What's let Eben counter on that one? Eben.
Yeah. So I was just going to feed into that and just say, if we do drink the Kool-Aid and we want to do VDI quote unquote right, we can give a good user experience and make it secure. So I think that's where we're talking about. If we did everything right, quote unquote, according to best practices and the way it was designed and the way you suggest, can we make it secure? And then that's where I think we could have, Ed, whoever, devil's advocate could say it's still not secure. So I'm trying to focus on specific security controls that are things that we miss set up VDI.
Hold on a second.
Because it's a configuration issue. Something that I need to do better to make Ed's argument non-valid.
Okay, so
there's
nothing you can do better. Okay? Look, when I'm sitting in my beautiful golden image, blah, 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 desktop in your data center, and I click on the poisoned email attachment, we are going down no matter what you did, okay? There's nothing you can do about that. When I use a browser...
There's loads you can do about that. Absolutely, stacks you could do about that. You could have decent antivirus software that's on your email exchange. You could ensure that the user has no admin rights. You could prevent
talking over each other again. Okay.
There's all sorts of things you could do to say that it's the whole network down. Potentially, what you've done there is implement a system where you haven't thought through the implications of what it is that you've deployed.
That's not true. Let's be very clear. The advanced forms of attacks that are out there today are attacks that nobody in the AV industry has seen. And my God, if you don't know what the halting problem is in computer science, let me tell you what it is. It is impossible for one program to determine whether another program is bad. So that whole industry is morally bankrupt. Let's just move beyond that, okay? You cannot stop an attack which shows up in the context of a virtual desktop, and it's not your fault. Okay? I'm not blaming anybody. You can't do it on
No. And what you've done there is you've taken an extreme and said this will happen.
I haven't taken an extreme.
Hold on a second. Simon, Andrew,
yes.
Take it as writ that antivirus literally is looking for the horse when you close the barn. The horse is gone after you close the barn door.
Okay,
it is a blacklist approach. It's not very good.
I'm not disagreeing with that.
Or common are those?
What I'm saying is to rely only on antivirus is in itself poor. There should be a number of layers around your environment. And if you say, well, antivirus can come in and wipe out our network, what else have you done? If all you've relied on is antivirus, then I completely agree that was a foolish premise because you can't rely on one particular layer. And if your environment is protected by one layer, it's more open to attack than if it's provided by multiple layers.
Right. So I think this is Tal. I just want to make a quick statement here, and I think that here's the way I'd like to frame it. I think that what we should think about is in a workflow that can comfortably replace a legacy desktop workflow with a VDI workflow. And this is the only place I'm talking about. I'm talking about every desktop workflow. I'm talking in a desktop workflow that can be replaced by VDI. That workflow does inherently become more secure than its legacy counterpart. It is not impenetrable. I'm not saying that there's no security concerns after you've done it. I'm just saying that once that workflow is moved over to VDI, you have implicitly enhanced the security of that workflow.
So let me ask a question to Simon and Ed real quick. Would you guys say that it's not even worthwhile having antivirus then because there's these halting problems that we could get attacked by?
I'm not going to answer that one.
Sorry.
I know antivirus vendors, and I do the best they can. They will actually if they have a big enough antivirus network, what they'll do is they'll catch the initial attack,
right,
and then pump it up to the other ones that haven't been attacked yet.
And we all know that.
But if it's a widespread attack, they'll never catch it.
So, do you believe it's FUD that the hypervisor-based antiviruses are better than an agent based on every desktop antivirus?
No.
Seems to me.
They're neither better or worse. They're just different. All they do is the hypervisor-based antivirus just offload all of that antivirus work, all the rules checking on files and memory to a VM that you can just plug as many cores as you want into.
Okay, wouldn't
Otherwise,
you agree?
You end up with a desktop virus storm, which is really worse.
But wouldn't you agree in general that having all your desktops in one central environment where you can manage them and enforce the antivirus policy, and we do know virus attacks break out even in VDI environments. You're right, you can't prevent some of these zero-day attacks. But what you can do is usually a user figures out my computer's slow or I have a virus, and with VDI, we can quickly rebuild that system. So I don't know, from my perspective as a layman here who's implementing these things, it seems to me that that's a little bit more secure than having those desktops be out at some remote office somewhere.
Oh, good Lord, no. I mean, right now, if you go to any of the conferences I go to, the virus and malware people are hardening their tools against the antivirus vendors. So what they're going to do is say, okay, let me have a checklist of these 40 antivirus things and tools, and let's just check them all. Therefore, it'll be invisible to those tools with their current rule sets. As the rule sets change, these hardening tools get better. So what's happening is that the antivirus people have done one thing. The attackers have done something to counter that already, and this is known and done today. There's actually a site out there that has it's public. It's what the antivirus vendors use, or anybody can use to say, hey, is there a virus in this tool, in this document or whatever? And by the way, the hackers use it too. After they harden their shells, they throw it up there and say, hey, are these 40 antivirus vendors, have they found it? Nope, good, send it out.
All right, gotcha. So I'll concede that point. So in general, I would say, and I don't know if we want to vote on it or not, but from antivirus, it seems like VDI, we could say, is no more secure or less secure than a non-VDI environment. Would we agree on that?
Absolutely.
I would agree with that.
Yep, that's right.
The premise was, let's forget about viruses for a second. So the premise was that, in general, a VDI environment is more secure, and one of the most important reasons why, of course, there's many different reasons why we could say it's more or less, but the premise that we were talking about was data leakage. So let's talk about that. So wouldn't you agree, Ed, that if we set up an VDI environment that didn't allow checkouts of VMs and that made you do everything through the VDI desktop, say for a call center or whatever the use case is that it's a good fit for, not for a traveling sales guy, right? But it's a good fit for this use case, that would be a more secure environment than the alternative, which would be to have hundreds of desktops spread throughout the call center.
No.
Okay.
I would not, because...
Let's explore that for a sec. Why would data leakage be just as bad with the VDI environment as with a non-VDI environment?
Because it's all about the user. It has nothing to do with the environment. It's about the user. Users are hostile. Users want to get their job done, full stop. And they will do anything they can to get that job done, full stop.
I think
if you build up the most secure VDI environment in the world and say, look, we're going to force you to go in here, and the CEO cannot get his email for that $50 billion deal. I will guarantee you he will be walking into the IT folks and said, put on a USB stick.
The CEO is not going to be using VDI, okay? Nor is the salesman. We're talking about a call center where there's a bank handling secure money transfers, or somebody's resetting passwords in a customer support environment, say for a third party.
If it takes too long to do, they won't use it.
Well,
bypass it.
No, I disagree there, because what you're doing there, Ed, is you've got, quite rightly, in your mind, an issue of data leakage and the importance of that data. Yet the example that you've been given is a call center. And quite often, in a VDI environment, for, say, a call center, that usage, that user experience will actually be pretty good. It's based on a LAN. It's not got any issues of wide area.
I've worked in a call center, and by the way, in this call center I'm talking about, for a standard call center where you're not doing a whole lot on the computer or using anything that's CPU intensive, that may be giving a good enough experience. But in the call centers I belong to,
let's pause centers, and then let's focus on, say, a user group that would have data that would be more of benefit to be outside of the network. And that wouldn't necessarily be a call center. It's more likely to be your sales executives. It's more likely to be your CEOs. It's more likely to be your product managers.
But here's the thing, is that is VDI more secure than the equivalent thereof in the physical environment? And the answer is not really. Regardless of what we're talking about, in a call center, I will tell you right now, having been there, most desktops are locked down to a ne'er-do-well anyways.
So
most desktops are already locked down and centrally managed and centrally patched, and they're backed up regularly. They have antivirus on them. They have anti-malware on them, but you can't plug anything into them and so forth. And I guarantee you, if you have that already and you move that to a VDI environment, you will have the same results, which means that you will be as secure as it was.
Absolutely.
How is that possible? If a user has physical control over a Windows computer with a hard drive in it, that can't possibly be as secure as having that Windows computer be behind a locked door.
Absolutely, it can be. You just lock down. I mean, most of those computers that are in a call center have their BIOS locked down, as well as many other things. And I mean, quite frankly,
look at all the work that you have to do to lock down those machines, right? Where again, I firmly agree. I firmly think that regardless of what you do, as long as you've got data on the endpoint, that data is less secure than not having it at the endpoint. Regardless of how many locks you have in front of it, nothing is better than not having any data at the endpoint, because you don't have to worry about it walking away. Right? I don't care if you've got a physical lock, if you've got a chain around the server, around the desktop. The point is that hard drive has sensitive information. It can walk out of the building.
So what we're saying is for an environment where they've got a lockdown environment, so they've locked down the Windows environment, they've locked down the PC, a VDI environment can offer a slight advantage, because any data that was on that end device, and granted you might have locked it down in some way, shape or form, but potentially there's data on that end device. Someone could walk out of the office with it, or walk in and then walk out of the office with it. They need not be an employee. If your physical security at the gate is lax, or they've come through a window, they could be away with that data. Having, say, a thin client, having no data on that end device, by using something like VDI or XenApp, any sort of virtualized desktop, then you add an extra layer of security.
Hang on a second. That's for a particular scenario where you have a physical human as an attacker. However, in general, the attack is launched against an executing piece of code. When the executing piece of code is in your data center as opposed to far away, and all of your data is in the same data center, and if the attacker succeeds, the attacker is exactly where they want to be. So there is no better place for me as an attacker to be than right in the middle of your big chunk of virtual desktops, because my goodness, from there to your servers is trivial, okay? So the vast majority of attacks attack code, and they're not humans walking out with your data. Data walks around anyway, and that's an issue. But, attacks compromises compute infrastructure from outsiders attacking. They compromise our computational infrastructure. If the computational infrastructure is in the same place as the data, and it's all in one place, and I can get there, it's really, really bad.
And by the way, hold on. We think this is all theoretical because there's been no escape to hypervisor attacks or things like that.
No.
Let me finish. A lot of people think this is theoretical. It's not. It has been done, guys.
Yeah, but I'm not even talking about that.
These attacks have been perpetrated because the virtual desktops that we're talking about are not always virtual. And not only that, even if they are virtual and I can escape out of there, whether it's via your networking, via an escape the VM attack or anywhere, people in their virtual desktops and virtual environments use flat networks. Because they use flat networks, you've just opened everything up to me. Thank you very much. I'm now in your environment. I'm where the data is. I'm in your data center. Keep me out.
Let me, if I may, let me give you guys a scenario that I personally was involved with last week. It was a European telco company where literally their version of data leakage was an employee leaving the building with, with a desktop with a hard drive in it that contained a bunch of sensitive information. With VDI, that data leakage would not have happened. Period. I understand what you're saying. You're saying that there are additional security considerations when you're moving the desktops into the data center. However, I think that the security implications of zero data at the endpoint are significant, and I think that I think you've got to give me that.
I don't. I don't. As long as I have Outlook on that desktop and I can shoot stuff around the planet, why do I care? Okay. There's physical access to data.
And again, for data loss outside of Outlook, a lot of banks will monitor email that is going out, monitor email for attachments, monitor email for data that's leaving the building. So yes, you're right. Once you've got Outlook, it's possible to use Outlook, but a lot of organizations will block that.
Okay,
great. That's another leg.
Hold on, Andrew. You're assuming that organization has a data loss prevention tool, and not all of them do. So don't go. That's a hit or miss depending on the organization.
You guys, hold on. We're all over the place here. Say there's 100 or even 1,000 different types of attacks an organization could suffer. What we're looking at are some specific attacks that seem to happen a lot, and you could theorize that they do happen. So maybe there's 80 other ones that we're not talking about. But for these that we're talking about, VDI is more secure than a non-VDI environment for these attacks.
I really disagree with you on that.
So
not more secure, it's differently secured. And now, hold on, before we go any further, I'd like to welcome Michael Berman to the conversation. I'm sure he's dying to chime in.
Hey, Michael.
Hey, sounds like I've been missing a fun panel.
Oh, this is great. We got everybody on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, look, you can do VDI securely, you can do VDI insecurely, but I've been working with some folks who really, really, really care about security, and if you do, you can do VDI more securely than non-VDI. There's no question in my mind. But you have to really care about it and then do it right.
Thank you.
That's the key. You have to do it right, and you have to have all these tools we were talking about: data loss prevention, defense, and depth.
And you got to be smart about your end users. You can't just apply VDI to any workload. I think that if you're smart about making sure that you're using VDI for the right workload and that you're implementing VDI correctly, then again, I think it's more secure than
I'm not sure it's the implementation of VDI that's really the question. I think it's the implementation of security around VDI that really is the security issue.
I hear what you're saying then. So if we do say there's 100 different things that we're trying to protect against, VDI might help with 5 or 10 or 20 or whatever number of those. But it's kind of senseless to implement VDI thinking you're going to be more secure if you still have 80 wide open exposures. So
absolutely.
It doesn't make sense to implement VDI to be more secure if you don't go ahead and take care of all these other things too. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Well,
yes.
So let's just talk about a couple of things though. Because what I've learned, from a pragmatic point of view, right? I'm not disputing the 100 different attacks, right? But we know 80% of the attacks rely on, 4 defects, where maybe number 1 is, misconfigured, unpatched systems. And clearly, I'll assert, it's not always true. You can do VDI really, really badly. But if you do VDI at all well, you can lock down and control the configurations. And that's a big win. You can also lock down removable media in a VDI environment really well, right?
You can also do that in a physical environment.
You can, but it's harder because those darn users have physical access to their desktops. And in a really secure environment, I like being able to take that away from the end user because the end users do funky things to their desktops. We have a huge demonstration or proof point here, alleged WikiLeaks, private manning, physical access to the desktop, downloads a million cables, walks out with a USB, right?
But that could have been prevented on a physical desktop by using controls within XP in order to prevent that.
Could have been done also by doing the BIOS on the computer with a password that they didn't have control, and disabled all USB type storage devices as well.
So now we're talking about the alternative to what I was saying. So we have these 100 things we're trying to protect against. We don't do VDI, so we only solve 80 of those things. We still have these 20 things that VDI fixes that we didn't do.
You're missing the point. It's not VDI even. VDI puts all your eggs in one basket.
Okay.
It puts them in the data center.
So I concede that those 20 things VDI does easily could also be done on the physical desktops that are out there.
Actually, and by the way, when people talk about VDI security, they're quoting 4 different things.
Okay, those 4 things then that VDI does good could also be done on physical desktops, like maybe whole disk encryption, locking down the physical desktops with a cable and a padlock, all these different things we could do. But I think the argument is that it's much less expensive to do that for a large environment, hundreds of desktops, thousands of desktops, with VDI than it would be to do that on a physical environment.
So let me take that. Let me take that. So let's be very clear. The vast majority of users need apps, not desktops. Okay? And so the assertion that it is VDI that solves this problem is blatantly false. That is, yes, you can get away with the vast majority of users using TS for an order of magnitude less hardware and less money thrown out the door, and still have some native desktops that you do a better job of. But for those users for whom a hosted thing is useful, you don't, for the very, very, very large majority of them, need a VDI desktop. All you need is TS. VDI desktops, as in running a Windows desktop OS as a VM, is useful in an extremely narrow use case, which is that the user is a power user. They need the functions of a desktop other than an app. Okay? They want to get hold of shells. They're doing management tasks, whatever it happens to be, they're developers, whatever it is. But it's tiny. It's like 5% of the total user base, okay, for which a desktop VM is appropriate versus just using TS. So VDI itself has a tiny use case. So let's get off this thing that VDI is the only thing there.
Yeah, I totally agree with Simon. And I think that's a difficult thing. We at Citrix hold exactly the same position that Simon just said. And where we keep getting pigeonholed is that people keep referring to VDI and terminal services under the same envelope, and they're 2 completely different things. When you actually look at how virtual desktops are deployed in the enterprise, we see a gigantic ratio of what you might call XenApp desktops or terminal services desktops, and a fairly small subset of those virtual desktops are actually VDI, meaning dedicated.
But even if we were to take, Tal, I think that's an excellent point, but really that's arguing as to whether or not VDI is a best virtualization solution or RDS. Even if we had that little jihad and that little battle, even in a terminal services environment, if it's been poorly configured, you could get exactly the same sort of issues in terms of security and exposure to risk than you could in a VDI environment.
Oh, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. The question is, why are you doing this stuff anyway? That is, when I talk to CIOs about why they are going down a desktop virtualization path generally, there are 2 primary buying reasons. One of them is they need to be able to deliver apps to mobile devices. And TS does that brilliantly. RDS does it brilliantly. And VDI is terrible on a tablet because nobody wants a Windows desktop on a tablet because my finger isn't big enough, isn't small enough. Okay? And then the other one is security. And my point is that the security argument is false. That is, doing VDI for reasons of security is wrong. That is, TS would do an awesome job for 95% of your users, With the rest of them, you haven't lost anything if you keep them on a normal desktop, lock it down more if you want, or whatever. But, going off and buying a shitload of servers and hypervisors and trying to get your desktop people through a vast new management and skill set with the hope that you're going to be more secure at the far end of it is just wrong.
I'd agree.
And you cannot assume just because you're a virtual desktop that you're more secure. The reason being is that all those things it says it solves, centralized management, centralized patching, and all that, is any good shop is doing that anyways. So
in fact, if anything, a VDI environment could increase your risk. And why? It's because now I've given you access outside of the physical network. So your ability to connect into the network has now widened. It's broadened out to wherever. It's broadened to any time, any place, anywhere. Because you could use your iPad in a cafe in order to access some services, and that's great. You can see your financial results, but also so could the guy sit next to you. If you fall asleep on the train, someone can use your services. Actually, you've increased the possibility of data leakage using a VDI environment if you don't have a number of layers at the back end in order to ensure that the data doesn't leak out and that the data doesn't get lost or accessed by people who don't necessarily need to access that data.
So there's a flip side security argument to the one that you just gave, which is, by the way, a great example. And it runs like this. If you force me to use a virtual desktop, as a user, I will use my browser to go to unsafe places, and I will drag all the shit on the internet into your data center. Do you want me to do that? I mean, really. This whole notion of pulling the entire internet through the corporate network just because I happen to want to go and browse some random site is profoundly stupid.
That goes back to my layering. You provide the resources that the user needs in order to get their job done, not necessarily all the resources that they need in order to check on their Facebook site.
I agree. But I am a user, just to say I'm a deprivileged user sitting at a spin terminal now. Well, let's go advocate those for a bit, because you've taken away my PC. Because nobody uses PC from anyway, right? If you didn't access the virtual desktop from a PC, you have the PC problem. So if I'm in a spin client, the only browser I have is the one on my virtual desktop. Okay, great. I am going to go to nastyware.com, and it is all coming into the data center. Whereas if I was on a client sitting at home on my home network, I would go to nastyattacker.com via my own network and not via the corporate network.
Well, I think what the takeaway from there is on your firewalls, just prevent nastyware.com.
Oh, yeah, right. Let's list all of the bad sites on the entire internet. Go for it, my friend. I'll see you in a couple of years' time.
I think we're all agreeing here. We're all agreeing here. Even you had something?
Yeah, that's a whole other discussion. Most organizations have proxy servers like Blue Code or WebSense or something to block all that out. And
I would say some of them do. I would not say.
So wait up. It doesn't block it out. Otherwise, why did RSA lose the key seats? Okay? So don't anybody give me this stuff that any of these things work. They do not. So don't dream about it. Okay? It isn't true that these things stop it. They stop known things. That's not the problem. Known stuff is not a problem.
Okay. That's like 90% of the traffic that you're talking about. You were complaining that VDI brings everything to the corporate data center. Now I'll go one step further. When we onboard new companies in our organization, if it's 200 people, 500 people, what have you, they don't get their own internet connection. They get a point-to-point link to our closest hub in that that country, wherever that continent is, and they have to go out through our internet connection, through our proxy servers.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. And by the way, remote development or remote untrusted workers who need desktops, that's a very good use case for VDI.
Absolutely.
One of the really good ones.
Thank you.
Wait, we agree on that?
But by the same token...
We agree? That's great.
But by the same token, when we start talking about that, those new users using your VDI desktop, again, I'm going to bring it down to user experience, because if the user experience is bad, they're going to find ways around it. Okay. Everybody starts arguing about that. It happens. I've done it. Everybody else has done it. The thing is when that user experience is bad, it impacts my ability to do my job, it impacts my paycheck, I'm going to work around it. Or I'm just not going to do anything and not do my job. So therefore the work doesn't get done. So either way, that's an impact and a risk to the company.
Or I'll email the stuff to my Google account and do it from there.
Yeah,
exactly.
We've already been here. We've already talked about this.
But
so
this is an important thing, and why. And people say using VDI or application virtualization, everything is more secure. If the user experience is bad, it's no more secure than whatever the guy can think up to get around.
That's partially true. That's partially true. Though there are use cases where it's not true. So, for example, in the remote worker scenario, what services you deliver them is up to you. But a good example, large Chinese software development shop trust their employees because employees steal the code. Everything's centralized. The employee doesn't even get to work in the building with any form of anything you could ever use. Let them steal stuff, right? Okay, yeah, you can make it that they don't steal your data that way. And by the way, those employees have got no rights anyway. They're not like us, power users, who will email us ourselves via Gmail or whatever, because the control is absolute. Similarly, very large Fortune 10 bank in New York, everybody is VDI. There are no PCs in the entire place because the trader cannot use the trading app when he's on the 4th floor. He can only use it on the 5th floor. Okay? And he is just not allowed to get access to anything, anytime, anywhere at all. Okay? And so the power user for whom you need absolutely control environment and you have to lock down and you're going to do so, case for VDI.
But, I mean, the thing is that regardless of VDI, application virtualization, endpoint virtualization, or whatnot, there is and even China has a different mindset than America and other parts of the country. If they can't do something, they're just not going to. In some ways, if they've been told they can do it, they'll do it. And if they, so that's a different mindset in each country that needs to be considered for all these rules and regulations and software and everything. But regardless of how you do it, there are attacks that will be able to see that data at any point in time. Even if it's just a screen blit attack where all I'm doing is sitting between you and your endpoint and I'm capturing the same screen that you're getting because HDX is sending it to you and I'm grabbing it that way. Either way, I can patch. There's software out there that will patch that all together and I can recreate your document as you're writing it. So,
well, sure. I mean, look, if you're delivering TS, HDX, or PC over IP to a client device which has got a keylogger on it, everything I type into that VDI session is going to the bad guys.
Well, not even I don't even need a keylogger. All I need to do is be able to see what you did so I can get your bit blitz.
Sure,
That's all that stuff does.
Yeah. So is that a reason not to? I mean, yes, that's potentially possible.
Wait.
But if I was making a decision about using VDI or not, or terminal services or not, what's the cost and effort required for an attacker in order to achieve that? And is that so easy for him to do, so simple, that I may as well not do VDI? Yes or no?
So let's be very clear. So this is Simon. My position is very clear. I love TS. It's fantastic. It's extraordinarily efficient, cost-effective, and it will be there forever for a bunch of reasons which are not related to security and everything else for delivering legacy apps. It is by far and away the most effective way of delivering a centrally managed service to a bunch of employees, and VDI is not necessary for the vast majority of end users. So when you look at it as why are people throwing money at doing the VDI thing anyway, the use case which is I need to get desktops to my iPad, I'm telling you, I don't believe that one. I think TS does a far better job there. And if you say I need to be able to do this for a security reason, my argument is no, use TS. Because TS does a fabulous job there, and by the time
but TS could be as inherently insecure if that environment hasn't been set up properly. You're just giving a slightly better user
that's
experience.
Right. But would I go and buy new servers and run Windows desktop OSs as VMs and go off and buy all the storage and stuff just to get nowhere? No, I wouldn't. That was the case. That VDI doesn't advance us beyond where we are today with TS and the existing client stuff, and
yes, all right, yes, fair point. Yep. I will agree with that. Yes.
But a lot of people use TS to go from their home or their bring your own device or their iPad to their desktop workstation.
Yeah. By the way, on the bring your own case, if my bring your own device has been compromised, we know that we're done, right? That is, delivering pixels doesn't help, and you can log all the keys. Okay.
But my question would be, in that case where you're TSing to your desktop anyway, does it even matter? If we ignore the economics, technically there's no reason why that desktop can't be a virtual desktop.
I mean a Windows client OS running as a VM?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no reason at all. The problem is, to do VDI, I've got to pay about 10 times as much as to do the same thing with TS for no incremental benefit.
So, I mean, we all agree that the ROI and TCO of VDI is not really there. But, I mean, the main thing, everybody agrees with that. It's kind of a hard sell from that perspective, except as a hardware upgrade, but that's a different story. From a security perspective, we're saying is that regardless of where the data is being displayed or lives, we're no different security-wise than if we were in the physical environment. The only thing we gain...
No different than we were when we had, say, HIPAA-compliant apps running via TS and a desktop. Right?
Well, there's an advantage to a thin terminal. And whether that thin terminal is TS or that thin terminal is for VDI, it's really the thin terminal that has an advantage for security purposes.
Again, I'd agree with that one, in that you've not got a disk there. Potentially you can lock out the number of devices that they could include, and potentially, yes, and then that's it. Just that physical device, especially if it got stolen, there's nothing on it. All of the stuff that Ed spoke of earlier in terms of locking down the BIOS, locking down the disk, all of that can go away. So that becomes just an easier device to deploy.
No.
And that
You still have another problem. Andrew, you still have another problem, and that is that everybody has these end-user devices.
Sorry?
Everybody has these end-user devices. You will be allowing certain things to connect through using, if we're doing RDP, it'll be USB over RDP. But you need to still lock that down somehow, and that means probably locking down either the end-user device, the whatever terminal you're using,
That's what it is.
Or you're going to be doing it somewhere else. But somewhere along the line, people are going to have to do that.
Because, and I'm not disagreeing that there's not an effort. It doesn't come out of the box as magic. But the purpose, no, that's the wrong word. The process of doing that is a little bit more straightforward because you don't have to configure the hard drive. You don't necessarily have to configure the BIOS. And quite often, these thin clients are centrally managed, so you can have policies that are applied straight as they get plugged into the network. It is a little bit easier with a thin client than a traditional desktop PC.
When thin clients have an economic value, they're a lot less expensive to manage. I was saying that I'm old enough to remember the X-terminal days. And X-terminals, have...
Hold on a second, Andrew. Let Michael finish.
I was just trying to say that thin terminals, right, if you guys remember X-terminals, they have like zero management cost over time, right? If they fail, you throw them away and replace them. You don't have to you don't pay an IT administrator to walk around and never have to fix them. Right?
True.
Yeah,
true, but they still are. I mean, whether or not I use a PanelLogic, a X server, X terminal, or any other type of terminal device, I could also be using an old version of a laptop as well because it just happens to be there. And I don't
right. But that's what I'm saying. What I'm trying to presuppose is there's an advantage to thin terminal. So, you don't need to use a thin terminal for TS, right? You can use, your MacBook Pro like I do. But if in these secure environments or these environments where you're trying to reduce the endpoint cost, a thin terminal has some economic value. That was my only point there.
Oh, I'd agree with you there.
Yeah.
I would agree with you there.
Yep.
But going with a thin terminal or whatnot, whether or not it is more secure than a laptop that has almost nothing on it, and you're basically just RDPing or using View or whatever it is or TS to get to the data, and there's nothing there locally, and it has very small drive, like a USB drive in it or whatnot, you're still looking at the possibility of end-user devices being connected all the way through.
You are, and moreover, you get back to my challenge, which is that for the user who has no access other than through your hosted blob. Every act that they undergo in terms of trawling through the internet is pulled into your data center. That is all of my consumer behavior.
And exactly, and the users are hostile. We all admit that. As a matter of fact, they're probably more hostile than anything we know because they do things we don't expect. So any VDI deployment that you're going to do, like for example, we had the example of the Evan's example of the call center. If I can lock down what the users are doing and only allow them to do certain things, and they are used to that, moving them to a VDI environment or any other type of environment for that matter where they get to do the same exact things with the same exact end-user experience, transferring them to VDI or not is basically a hardware upgrade, and they get the same thing. Doing a power user or say a set of developers and moving them to VDI would be painful because they need more compute power than you realize. So there's that. Moving a bunch of scientists over could also be bad because the devices they use do not connect. So you got to choose your workloads properly, and you need to know what you're doing in the first place because if you don't know how the user does their job, you can't build a security shell around that to protect yourself.
Well,
I can agree with that. I mean, I just think so. Again, it's the first part about it is being holistic about when to use desktop virtualization. The second part is to ensure that that security is a primary consideration when implementing desktop virtualization. And if you follow those guidelines, the desktops that you replace with desktop virtualization will be more secure than they were before.
Well, they will be the same, minimally at least the same security. I'll agree. I'll go that far. I will not say more.
No, I think you can do better, Edward.
No, if you do the exact same things, you get the exact same thing.
Well, no.
I
don't think that's what we're saying. I think
that's
it's
not what he
best
said.
Practice, Edward. So best practice now is you've got I don't mean to be marketing here, but best practice is you've got virtual security appliances running on your hypervisors. Best practice means you can automate your strict configuration management. You can automate your vulnerability checks. You can automate your firewalling and IDS, IPS. You can automate, any number of common security best practices in a VDI environment much more easily than you can in any other environment. So that's where this drops off. I mean, I don't know that VDI is currently economically viable. I mean, I think what we've been hearing from Simon and others on this call, and I've heard as well, is that for a lot of people in the marketplace, VDI is simply not economically compelling, not the way server virtualization is. But if you are doing VDI,
then it's being sold wrong.
You can disagree with me. Oh, yeah. Maybe I'm not. That isn't what I heard, but I think I have heard this today that TS and RDS, beat VDI from a cost point of view.
Well, that's for sure.
Okay.
That is 100% definitely. Nobody will ever argue with you about that.
Yeah, but let's just take cost out of the equation for a second and just
if we take cost out of it, I can
hold on.
Right now,
Let me finish my thought.
Let Mike finish.
Mike Foley, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So let's just take cost out of the equation for a second because the cost is changing almost weekly, right? So we can't really compare the cost of 6 months ago to the cost of today. But if you start thinking about the governance, like what I think Michael alluded to, the abilities that are now inherent in VDI, and I'm not going to talk about terminal servers because I don't have a whole lot of experience with them, but just from a VDI standpoint, the ability to automate, the ability to shrink the window of vulnerability, I can create a brand spanking new VM for you literally within minutes or seconds. That capability is a governance story. And when I talk to my customers and I say, look, I'm not going to try and sell you VDI from a cost standpoint, but from a governance standpoint, it may be worth the cost. It's a different argument.
Yeah, that's where I came into the beginning of this call, where I said for people who really care about security, and I'll say that includes the people who really care about governance, you can build a compelling use case around VDI. And they are doing it. And I think, and Simon said that himself. He was talking about a big bank who's using VDI because they don't have any desktops inside the building. Those kinds of people are embracing VDI for all the reasons we're talking about.
I would suggest that the bank was doing it because it was easier to govern what users were doing rather than from a security perspective.
Yes, it's easier to be more secure with VDI.
Nope, I wouldn't say that either.
Of course you wouldn't, Edward.
The reason why I won't say that, and we're actually hitting our limits here, but the reason why I won't say that is that it's not necessarily easier.
It's much more complex.
It can be very complex to do it, either way you do it.
Okay, hold on.
You need to have the right...
I hear what you're saying.
I'm saying you need to have the right tools and the right planning, the right architectures before you even think about VDI to do it.
No, you're right. So I said it wrong. So my takeaway is it's easier to maintain security if you do all the hard work up front to implement VDI correctly.
Well, I think that same statement could be if I do physical desktops. If you do all the legwork up front, it becomes easier.
I disagree with you there, Ed.
Absolutely not, Ed. Absolutely not. I have yet to be in any organization who track their physical inventory and configuration management properly. Yet to see it. And I know in a VDI environment I can do it.
Okay.
But you have to do the hard work up front. There's no question.
And it is hard.
That's just because nobody's thrown the effort into doing it. I mean, it's not that it's undoable. I mean, if you look at, say, let's just be clear.
You can't say nobody.
No, wait up. Just
you don't say nobody's doing it.
No, wait. Just listen for a sec. If you take the arguments of so Big Fix started it, then it's local 5 and virtual computer, right? The argument there is that, and the Zen client, I guess. The argument there is that the PC config and lifecycle management benefits which occur from golden images and everything else can be done just as easily on a client-side thing as they can on a server. And by the way, the data can be encrypted at rest, and all of those properties.
That's not true. It cannot be done just as easily on the client side.
There's what?
I don't have control of the client.
Very few organizations distribute their Pixie boot environment that is used for automatic ghosting of systems out to the end user desktops. They all have usually a central build environment.
Hold on a second. One person at a time.
They have a build lab usually, or one building that's provisioned. But if you got remote users or somebody in a field office who needs a new desktop, they're going to have to ship it out or figure something out. Not as easy as...
Hold on, Stephen. Go ahead, Simon.
Pixie, okay? Forget Pixie, because none of this actually uses Pixie. I've not ever... I mean, the whole notion, go and take on the VMware boys about check out and check in, which is a bizarre notion. In general, whether I run this thing on a hypervisor, which happens to be in my data center, or a hypervisor that happens to be on a client, there's not a whole lot of difference. That is, I could achieve the same golden image notion that is within minutes or seconds or whatever you said. I can give you another one, okay? That is all possible on a rich client.
You didn't say possible.
Whilst I have silence, let me tell you some other reasons why VDI is doomed.
Now I agree with you.
We're not here about talking about why VDI is doomed. We're talking about the security of it, but that's a different story.
Yeah, for those reasons.
But if it's not economically viable, and I think that's an open question.
Well, it's becoming better. The economics of VDI are becoming better because nobody's doing it, so VMware is making it free, okay? So if you have an ELA with VMware, what I'm hearing from large customers is that basically they're giving you View free because...
I would really appreciate it if we get off the cost component of the discussion, because I'm happy to have a separate podcast on that alone. I just feel like it's
a non-security podcast.
Yeah, I think we can definitely do that somewhere else, and I can suggest a forum. Anyway,
I feel like it's derailing the conversation. I think that there are people who are there's use cases for VDI. It sounds like everybody agrees that there are use cases for VDI, and those use cases, part of the reason that those use cases are compelling is because they can be made more secure with VDI.
Agreed.
Well, they can be.
We all agree except Ed.
I don't know if they can be more secure. It's just different security, but you need to do, I'm going to say this again. You need to do all the hard work up front, which is you need to have all the right tools in place. You have to have all the right management in place. You need everything that you need in place before you can even do this.
And Edward, that goes back to something you and I are in violent agreement about. It's all about the architecture.
You got it.
Right? It's all about the architecture.
Absolutely.
None of this is pop the CD in, run setup.exe, click, 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 I'm done, which is the standard Microsoft mantra.
So essentially, having VDI does not make so if you had a traditional desktop environment and you move to VDI, it's not now magically more secure.
Correct.
There's no little internet pixies that have all just woven a beautiful spell that makes that inherently more secure than what you had before. If you move from a crap environment to a virtual crap environment, it's still crap.
That's right.
You have such a lovely way of putting that in.
Crap in, crap out.
There's a lot of value in having no data on the endpoint device. I don't see how you guys are willing to discount that as a security benefit.
I totally agree with you.
But that goes back to Simon's point. If you're not locking down user behavior, and they can just email all the credit card data or medical data.
That's where you throw in DLP technologies.
Well, but going to a crap virtual environment, you don't have DLP because you don't have DLP in crap environments.
This is about security and VDI. You can't reach out to random technologies that haven't been created and don't work. Okay. So you can't
I think I'm no guiltier than some of the other folks on this line of bringing up alternative technologies over VDI because I thought this was about VDI.
Hey guys, we've gone over our allotted time. So what I'm going to do is shut down the podcast. We can continue the conversation afterwards.
This pissing contest will be brought to you at a later date.
No. You have to read it at a pub. Come on, guys. Got to continue this at a pub somewhere.
We definitely need to do more of this. But so Simon, Tal, thank you very much for joining us. Andrew, thank you for joining us.
Well, as always, thanks.
No
Sorry for being late.
We could definitely do this for another 6 hours. So what I'm going to do is...
Oh, can we?
Let me end this part of it. We can continue afterwards.
Okay.
All right. Thanks very much, Mike.
Citrix won the debate. Yay!